So, welcome to the third episode of Earning Your Rights, the new NEPA podcast covering everything in the arts that you could possibly want to be part of, ever. Here we've got Marcy, Dan, Mark, and myself, Daryl. And I think we're getting into a groove. This is number 3, and, well, I'm feeling less mic shy.
I'm feeling more like Stella, I'm not gonna lie.
Like Stella, like... Stella!
No, more
like his
Stella
groove is here?
got my groove back, you know.
Oh.
See? Deep Illusions, episode 3. It's starting, we're starting to get to the deep stuff.
I thought that old Stella too. Okay. Yeah.
I could also take that.
Just yell. There's also Stella Artois, right?
I can never not see Elaine Bennis yelling that out every time I hear that one episode of Seinfeld where she keeps doing it. It's just like, oh, you're so funny.
So I learned or relearned a word recently that I wanted to try to sneak into here. Didactic.
Didactic, I love that word.
I loved it too. I mean, I had come across it, I can't remember where, but the idea was, is writing responsible for being educational or leading, or is art, as a matter of fact, responsible for imparting the recipient with some sort of inspiration or new ideology?
That was an intense question. We should define didactic. It's aggressively teachy, usually. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
I think art can definitely be didactic. I mean, sometimes it's really in your face. Remember the last time we were talking about like absurd art and stuff that's kind of like the challenges on the viewer of like, what am I? You know?
Now, let's work the idea of didactic in versus ideas like logical fallacies. So, on one side, you have a very intentional and deliberate means of teaching somebody something through a piece versus a somewhat subversive or manipulative way of imparting an idea with somebody through the way that you use your words.
Super manipulative, yeah.
So, Dan, let's start with you. Let's talk about some logical fallacies.
Sure.
I'm gonna throw out my favorite one.
Go.
The straw man.
I love the straw man. Straw man is when you misrepresent your opponent's argument, so you can make it easy to knock down.
So instead of using the idea, you use a likeness of the idea, a straw man. And the idea is that the likeness of the idea is easily tied in with the concept, but it's so ridiculous that it's dismissive, so people will get into that intellectual lull and accept your dismissal of the straw man as a dismissal of the actual concept.
It's usually you take the person's argument and you make it very extreme, right? So it happens, gun control debate. Both sides do it constantly. It's always all or nothing kind of arguments, but most people aren't making those actual arguments.
And just on the topic of, well, not gun control, but politics in general, politics are rife with logical fallacies.
Sure are.
And it just kind of reflects the fact that they're not actually trying to communicate to people as intellectual beings, but they're trying to communicate to people as beings to be controlled, because they don't have respect for your ability to parse information, which is why they use likenesses instead of realities.
Right. And just the agreed silence. I mean, we'll just fire off a quick list of what they do. Ad hominem, attack the person instead of the argument. Straw man, misrepresent the argument. Appeal to fear constantly. You know, it's either me or the highway. That's also the strong man. Strong man is all over politics, right? I'm the only one who can stop the thing. I'm the only one who can do that. A lot of begging the question happens now, particularly in news. I don't know if you guys have caught this one. Like, you read a headline and you know how it wants you to feel. It's not like gun control debate happening. It's fanatical liberal senator or something like that. That's a lot in there. A lot. The big lie came back in a big way with some current leaders, which is just another, like, you just say a slogan, make America great again, but it's super vague on purpose because there's no action. You don't have to have policy, or that happens a lot sinisterly in history. The Jewish question was the big lie, again, and you just kind of toe that.
When I finally do run for monarch, and by run I mean make people run, I'm probably going to be the type of demagogue that uses both logical fallacies and didactic.
Is anybody else starting to become a little afraid of Daryl? I know this in episode 2. Well, I mean, and we'll put a full list of them because there's so many of them. But I think the key point is that, you know, you can argue in good faith, right? And there are argument techniques like figure of language techniques, the 3 appeals, logos, ethos, pathos. Like those are generally good faith arguments where you're just trying to prove a point. You know, you have evidence, you engage other perspectives. The logical fallacies are always used. Sometimes I don't even know if it's consciously, but it's when people don't have a real point. They can't back their argument, so they gotta spin around. There's even ones that are called, like red herring, for instance, is derailing the argument. And again, we'll put a big list of it. They're really dangerous because if you don't know they're happening, they can get you. Because a lot of them prey on like a bandwagon's a perfect one. It's everybody's doing X, why aren't you doing X? And that preys on our wanting to fit in, right? And that's the thing about politicians, not all of them, but quite a few of them. They know that these are easy ways to communicate, and what's even great about them is you don't have to have a fucking policy to back them up. You could just say that crap, and people have a vague idea in their own head, and they just fill the blanks in for it.
Sure.
And that's why they're so dangerous, and that's why a lot of times when we get people in positions of power who get there based on, you know, crap, there's nothing happens. And that's not just a jibe at Trump. That's a jibe at politician after politician after politician. Like, I bet we could sit here and name presidents. Let's just do presidents who we think, how far along that line did they tread?
Mark, could you imagine a situation or scenario where using these methods of communication could strengthen creative writing?
Well, I mean, I think that can I jump back to last time when we talked about Orwell? I mean, I think he had appeals to authority in a way in 1984. There was some creative writing that it came up in. That's one that I can think of off the top of my head.
That's a tough question. I mean, unless you're going to like make a parody of it, you're going to call it out on purpose. I don't know if there would be like a good virtuous reason to use those.
Well, let's not necessarily say virtuous.
I agree with Mark. If you point them out through parody, like a lot of the great, like Orwell did, like Swift did, you can help people get aware of them because they are genuinely malicious, and they're behind, like that. The thought process behind some of them have led to things like the Nuremberg defense. Like I think the sad part is you don't need to use them because you have that whole other list of figurative language that's fine to use: metaphor, simile, irony, illusion, all that stuff. And it's like, hey, if you're being genuine, you're going to stick with that kind of stuff. You're going to do logical appeals, emotional appeals, but like you're not going to tread into that. And I think unless it is parody.
Do you mean using a logical fallacy on purpose?
Yeah.
Really? I didn't think of that. Yeah, I guess, I mean, if you're like making a parody, or if you wanted to purposely fool the reader, you know, make them snap out and make like a plot twist or something, I suppose so, yeah.
You know what? That's actually a really good point. Just building an immense, almost even pull the rug out from underneath them plot twists.
Right.
And I was listening, and this would be relevant too. I was listening to a podcast called EFAP, and one of the guys mentioned how Jane Austen was really good at making stupid characters, and how talented that is, because that's hard. So if you're gonna make like a really manipulative politician character, you're gonna want them to be really good at the logical fallacies, because it's what happens. And I think it would be powerful because then you're following them around, so you know it's BS. And that's how you see them, because it's hard to catch them unless you really know what they are, you know.
Kind of reminds me of a situation like I think in maybe some like Alfred Hitchcock films where he would kind of maybe lure you into going along with some really negative situation, and like you start to see the perspective of somebody who's doing really bad things. And I can't think of a good example right offhand, but then he snaps you out of it, and that's kind of the whole point, is to take the audience and shake them up by luring them down the wrong path and then showing them the error of their way.
I like that idea, and it's almost like building the allegory in a way, because somebody who's living through this false or separate reality where there's a surface that they can't quite breach, you know, and then throughout the piece, they have to actually discover what's going on there.
Well, and to be fair, there is one that is a genuine writing technique, red herring.
Okay.
Because that's how twists work. You know, so you can use one in a positive way because you use it to create that twist.
Yeah,
but
good point.
You know, I think it depends too on how the context where they're showing up. If they're showing up in a creative piece and it's not meant to manipulate, it is a parry or something, they're fine. I think it's when they show up in argument that's where, or like in discourse, that's when it starts to get dangerous. Because then people will argue over them, and we have no context because they're lies. You know, so it's like a huge wasted effort. And meanwhile, some of them are used by people maliciously to cover up what's really going on. And they show up a lot in actual conspiracies. They are always in the rhetoric before genocide. They're always there.
And in light with genocide and conspiracies, do you think that there might be value in using these methods to deprogram by showing people how easy it is to fall into programming when you're unaware of it?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be a good educational tool.
I think it's a good thing to talk about, to give examples. Like, we'll provide a lot of examples because, I mean, you're going to be doing this with the pockets a lot because the patriarchy and like any kind of oppression of somebody's group always has a lot of logical bullshit behind it because it's illogical. It doesn't make sense. So they have to try to spin it. Like, do you think of any that you, like, just general ideas that you've come across in your research?
Thank you for putting me on the spot. No, I mean, I can't off the top of my head, but I think that you're on to something, and I think, with what Mark said too, it's an educational tool. I know that I've brought logical fallacies up in the classes that I've taught. I can remember having them come up in classes I was in college. In high school too, maybe I was lucky.
I think you were lucky.
I think I was lucky.
The only time I got that in high school was taking a specialized philosophy class as a senior with like 12 other people.
Yeah, see, and I mean, I don't think we learned that they were logical fallacies. We were just like, hey, there's this thing called a red herring, for example, maybe. Here's what you got to look out for. And I know that there were other ones that came up. I don't remember what, because it was like 30 years ago, but...
Oh, there's tons of them, too.
That same class that should be teaching us how to scramble eggs and do taxes.
Like we
should be teaching us logical fallacies, yes, in the life skills kind of class.
So I'm going to throw out something kind of paranoid, but I feel like there may be a vague sense of truth to it. Because we all agree that we should be teaching our kids this stuff because it's how they get manipulated.
I already know where you're going with this one.
But now, may I ask, is there a social reason that we don't teach kids this because we would lose control over them?
Yes,
absolutely.
For the same reason that...
Because Santa Claus is obviously... Which would he be? What logical fallacy would appeal to authority, maybe? Appeal to fear?
Yeah, fear,
yeah.
Got to behave or Santa won't bring toys.
Yeah, it's definitely very Skinner-esque. It's very like...
Elf on the Shelf.
Elf on the
Shelf.
Watching them.
Yeah, that's one too.
True.
Yeah.
That is true. But as you were saying, like, could there be a reason for increasing that low and common denominator? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because for the same reason that we don't see people pushing money into education the way that you'd expect them to compete with other nations, because it doesn't necessarily fit an agenda or a build, because it would cause a social upset in the political and financial structure of the country. And some people aren't necessarily a big fan of that idea.
It's weird because that behavior itself, I believe, is a logical fallacy of avoiding the context. Because if we took the big context, we would say that investing more in education is good as a whole because it, in general, improves society. It helps improves people's lives. And when people's lives are good, they tend to not be walking around, napalming other people and stuff. But it's that short-sighted view, and I'm gonna find it. But
just think about the first time when you were younger when you've corrected a parent. They didn't like it.
Well, I think this definitely falls into a bit of cherry picking, but I think the one that's maybe the closest is default bias. It's the best of all possible worlds fallacy. Like, you trick yourself into saying this is as good as it's going to get. We see that a lot with lack of social improvement. Essentializing is a good one. Once something is X, they're always X.
Got it.
Deliberate ignorance is refusing to lift. Have you ever tried to criticize somebody and they go, "My mind's made up. Don't even try it."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also one. Like, there's a ton of them.
That's
and
why I'm single, actually.
There's an example from Pockets.
Where?
Cheers.
There's a suffragette song that I use in the play, and the first guy that they sing about, you know, his mind is already made up.
Yep.
He's not going to hear anymore.
Yeah, and that also goes into stuff like the appeal to ignorance, where you say, if one thing, you know, you ignore anything that refutes your claim, or you dismiss evidence that does, like this happens with quantum physics a lot because we can't prove everything, so you dismiss the whole theory offhand. But one that's really interesting, appeal to tradition. It's always been done this way.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
But I found a really, let me just find it real quick.
I never realized there were so many.
There's like 150 at this point, and I just picked like the most, like they're everywhere.
Common ones.
Yeah, let me find. There was one we were talking about. Confirmation bias is a big one. Blind loyalty is pretty huge.
That might fit.
Yeah. I got gaslighting. That's what I want to think of. That's very related to. So, like the term gaslighting comes from a play, and I'm blanking off of the playwright's name. But what's happening in the play is the husband is intentionally trying to drive the wife insane. And what keeps happening is the gas lights in their apartment keep dimming. And she keeps saying the gas lights are dimming. And he keeps saying, no, they're not, no, they're not. And eventually what you learn is that he's killed one of the other tenants because he thinks she's rich. And so every time he goes to search for her hidden money, he's turning on the lights in her apartment, which is
Dimming theirs.
So his wife figures it out. And then realizes that he's trying to drive her insane as almost like to get her out of the way, and ends up winning in the end. But like that's where that term comes from, that deliberate challenge of reality. That happens so often right now. It's weird, and that gets back to that notion of cognitive dissonance, is where you can have two contradictory ideas in your mind, but what you refuse to do is compare and contrast them, because that means you actually have to decide which one's right.
Well, I mean, if you've already defaulted to somebody else being an authority figure for the most part, I mean, challenging, even mentally challenging their authority might feel like a betrayal if you're the type of person, or if you've been goaded into a situation where you need to rely on them.
Exactly. And two, and I think we're too quick to wrap our identity in fleeting things. You know what I mean? So like there is this definite party loyalty thing going on. That's the one called the big lie, which is everybody agrees to a slogan or a code or whatever, and you just, no matter what, you just regurgitate it ad infinitum.
Oh, yeah.
Now, one of the things that I don't know if you guys have made the connection yet, because it's probably there, but throughout periods of art, painting, we've seen this too, you know? Just imagine all the religious art and all the ideas that they've imparted in the same way. All the patriotic art, etc., etc. I mean, whether it's writing, whether it's art, whether it's music, leaving somebody with an idea, leaving somebody with a motivation or a concern, there's tremendous value in that if you want to lead people, you know?
Especially in days before literacy, before books were available and you know,
Telemedicine.
schools. Yeah, well, a painting is going to be your means of communication, or
Or
songs,
a passion play,
a play,
something
sure,
like that.
or what you learn at church, what people tell you.
Well, I have this interesting theory about religion, if you don't mind. It's just a real quick one. I was reading the Dhammapada, which is a short collection of Buddha sayings. It's really interesting. It says pretty much what you'd expect until the very last chapter, and it's called Monks. And it basically paraphrased Buddha. It was, give all the monks all your money, because you don't need it, you know. And I'm like, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, yo, this is not the same thing. And in my head, I'm like, man, if only the Buddhist monks like just went across Europe and like kind of sat with the Bible writers, they really could like, no, you gotta plant that seed throughout. He's gotta be talking about the church the whole time. Otherwise, you can't just throw that in at the end.
And in 2,000 years, you'll get their kisses.
I can't wait for the televangelists to do this for you.
Oh, they do it all. That John Oliver piece on that seed faith thing where they're just manipulating people. They're logical fallacies out the wazoo.
Jets for Jesus.
Jets for Jesus. They need to be able to do it, you know.
Jesus needs $25.
All right, listen. This is off the record, but if I ever become a priest, I have an ulterior motive.
Well, and here's a good one.
Ulterior motive.
I was gonna say
Is this
just
before or
one.
after you're a monarch?
Ooh. If I can combine the two, then I would.
Well, it's his. You're basically Henry VIII. Then, because you could do it. Like you could just be like that guy. Oh my God. Like, you're not gonna give me a divorce? All right, I'm gonna start my own church then. And no one was like, wow, scary.
I'm gonna call it the not the two doors, maybe the four doors. Yeah.
The 4 doors.
It's a Ford.
I like that. 4-door sedans. Henry Ford.
Yep.
We see this one a lot now. The not in my backyard. This notion that by pushing something away or putting a barrier, it will somehow eliminate the problem. That's a pretty common one too. Sorry, I'm just looking. I'll post these on the YouTube comment. But yeah, it's crazy how once you like the one thing I'll say about them, and the only danger of knowing them, and please know them, but once you know them, it gets really frustrating when you know them because you're like, because you hear
Nothing
people.
is true then?
Nothing.
Like what's real?
I love that's for some reason, and I think it has to do with how polarized, how crazy everything is. But in our country, especially, this whole everything is subjective keeps coming up all the time, and it's like, no, your perception is subjective, but it's of an objective reality that by consensus and repeatable results and laws, we can go, yeah, there's real things like death. Because if it was
Taxes,
gravity,
That's about it.
and
gravity.
but it's a weird one because it's like a form of shutting down debate because it just comes to, well, it's just my opinion. You know, it's just my, and you can't change. It's just my opinion, and it's like, okay.
But that's better than when somebody takes their opinion and says it's a fact.
Agreed. It is better, but
Because
it's
then
still kind of.
You're at least acknowledging it.
I know it's like, hey, it depends on the context. Like, you shouldn't just walk up to somebody on the street and be like, so, what do you think about post hoc fallacies? So, like, but like if you're having, like, it makes you a really
Unless you
shitty.
do it on camera.
Unless you do it on camera. Like, but I personally think it makes you kind of a shitty person if you are having a genuine good faith debate with somebody and you default to, well, it's just my opinion. Because then like, you just wasted time there. You know, so
The whatever.
yeah, but yeah, I think it's good to like take away the hero victim narrative in your own
Unfortunately, I
life
don't
and
have,
be willing to be told like some shit that will change your stuff. You know,
I don't have another charger for it, so we're just gonna end up switching to the one.
it's okay. Just make sure Mark's on it. Mark,
I
come
was
over.
gonna say Mark can sit over here.
What?
Right? Mark can
Oh
sit
yeah,
over
the mic
here.
is still there.
Oh.
I mean, the mic is the bread and butter.
Mike's the bread. Oh,
So
it looks very metallic for bread and butter. That's all. Sorry.
now, one of the things that I wanted to pick up on or cover is I was actually at this art gallery like 2 weekends ago, and the artist had delivered a really powerful spoken portion of his piece, right? And his descriptions of what was going on, like, you can tell that he was a person that put aesthetics before anything else, you know?
Interesting.
So you can obviously tell that, like, his transmission of an aesthetic was the first portion or the roadblock to building the reality that he was trying to shape. I was envious, actually, you know? So, and it wasn't so,
Could you give me an example? I can't quite.
I wish I
My
could,
brain
I
around
wish maybe I can reach out to him and get a little copy of it, but his description and his choice to balance words and phrasing alternatively, you know, kind of reflected the kind of confusion that the character would have. You know, there's
Is it like Dadaism almost?
I don't know. There was like, all right, in a sentence, you can choose to order the words in a certain way that's typical, but you could also do it in a way that makes sense that's less typical.
Sure.
So it's kind of like he was switching between the two of them to create some sort of fissure, you know? In addition to all the aesthetic wording, right?
Yeah.
And in addition to all the descriptive wording, so it just all came together in this really kind of picturesque way, you know? I'll have to give him credit after I check in with him and make sure that he's okay with me name dropping him. And then I'll see if I can get a little script to post in here. But I wanted to talk about building aesthetic with you guys and some of the ways that you have chosen to perhaps map out an image or build out roadblocks to reality that you were trying to impart.
Wow.
Yeah, you does that. Well, it's interesting that I think sometimes, unfortunately, like I don't know about like because it sounds like that person has a mission in their art.
Well, actually, he does have a mission, like
which is awesome, but I don't quite have that. So I write more willy nilly. So I think it depends on like anything. It could like poetry could just be an idea that I want to get out. A word comes out for a story. It could just be something. I think it all depends on what you're trying to do. But I do think even if you're doing it with a specific purpose, like him, you got to do a little map of how I'm going to do this, like mentally first. That's,
I guess for a poet, you might. I mean, if you're writing a poem about the game chateau, you want to use a lot of different details. But like, I don't know. If like in a piece of prose, I think if I was going to just try to build a description of an environment, like my character is in an old hotel room or something, like I don't like to go into a whole lot of detail. I don't like to read the details, so I'm not going to write it. Make other people read it. So like, I try to think of like 2 or 3 details that really kind of capture the atmosphere, the spirit of the place.
Or that you could use later on as
Yeah.
like, oh, I remember when he was in the hotel room.
Yeah, sure.
well, and I think I could think of 2 authors who did that a lot with a lot of description, and one was George R. R. Martin. But he goes on too much, and the other one was Sylvia Plath, who was doing it on purpose to try to mimic a mental illness. So it's like in the bell jar. That's why everything is so depressed and like obsessive. And so I think I don't know. Like it can get tricky when you world build, because I kind of agree with Mark. I think it's better to flesh it out later, like a couple key details, and then let the character, because you're going to describe stuff naturally as the characters interacting with whatever. I think you could obviously do a piece that's totally different though, where it's like if we were trying to do that, what it sounds like that person's doing sounds very deconstruction-esque, where they're like trying to point out the gap between literal and figurative meaning and all that stuff. There was this, he was rolling, I'm gonna screw up the French, I always screw up the French, I think it's Barta, I don't know how it's pronounced, but he gave this great example of this escalator, and there's a sign that said dogs must be carried on the escalator, and the whole essay was about literalism in language, but how like if you took that sign literally, you couldn't get on the escalator without a dog, right? And that's the whole thing that deconstruction was trying to do, but then it got, like, the feminist deconstructions took it up, and they pointed out that, hey, this could get really dangerous with words like mankind. And it can go the opposite way, words like male nurse. Like, it's wanting you to think things. And it's the same thing, and, I'm going to drop some hard F and R's, but, there's 2 other words in our language that we were taught, especially in this culture, younger, we were taught that they went dumb or uncool. But they have actual literal meanings that could soak in there. So the words are faggot and retard. You should go out and say them. But you know what I'm saying? Like that. I try to teach my students, like, yeah, I know you're gonna fight me back on this. You go, that's not what I was taught. But like, see what society's doing to you. See how it's making that unconscious connection in your brain, making it harder for you to see other people. And this happens throughout history. The word lame, which used to be used so much more often, became uncool. But of course it has a literal meaning. When people used to walk through with like leprosy, like, and it's just language has this weird way of taking the marginalized groups and teaching our children a word that means them, but a definition that means bad somehow, and then it's just in there. And that was one of the most interesting concepts I ever learned ever. And that was the feminist deconstruct, Uruguay, Sixu, they're the ones who pointed that out, like, hey, language can be a weapon if you're not careful.
So just like perception is reality, context eventually becomes reality as well.
Exactly.
So, and it's the same thing with even terms for different races.
Yep.
My pet peeve currently is POC, the people of color. It's kind of like this bandage that just means other than white.
Yeah.
And firstly, it just doesn't sound very nice. Pock. What's the last pox that you've known in society? I don't know. The plague.
I was just thinking, I'll get a little off topic, but I just want to throw in, like, a couple days ago, I realized how seldom do you hear people say humanity?
Almost
That's
never.
true.
Almost never.
Every time I read the news, it's, this group, that group, this group, that group, this group, and I would, like, Why? Why can't we say human?
And the
Human.
behavior is whatever they're describing belongs to all groups, always,
Yep.
you know? And if you actually really thought about it, like, I imagine that it's what? 5% across the board of people, no matter how you divide them in a demographic, will be assholes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
absolutely.
I would go even higher and say any random sampling of 10 people, you probably have an asshole.
I totally believe that.
And
Doesn't
it's
matter what their race.
also,
gender,
and
creed.
for another time, remind me, I want to talk about the words we use as insults, because I found something interesting about that that's doing another social conditioning thing. But yeah, no, it's like people are people, right? And we can sit here and we can be honest and be like, racism is the stupidest fucking thing because it's skin pigmentation. Oh, sexuality, come on, you're adults and you're consenting. That's not. I always felt like when I used to have to teach the gay marriage debate, which was weird to do. But when you logically do it, it's like this is only a few years ago. Like that's how crazy how quickly that issue changed. But then I would start just telling kids like, look, I'm not gonna bullshit you. It sucks to be gay in society. You wouldn't pick it if you had a choice because you're gonna be ostracized. You're gonna be oppressed. Like that's messed up. Don't do that to people. And we can't seem to get beyond these non-issues that we then made. That's the problem. We made them social issues. So the results of slavery are still in the country. Results of institutionalized racism happen freaking constantly. Results of the patriarchy. Results of, and then it starts reverse into where you get this weird so when affirmative action happened. Yeah, it was needed, but it was really badly executed because it's just you're now creating quotas of minorities, and it's just racism in a different direction. And it's and I think it gets to the point that we're all bringing up is we just need to sit down and talk about it as people.
I mean,
you know?
I would be happy to do away with affirmative action in any way, shape, or form if we were to increase the baseline for all people across the board. However, we're very unwilling to increase the baseline.
Well, and it's sad to see it because when I was a sub, I could see the cycle of poverty firsthand. So when you actually, I'll tell the anecdote. So I was teaching at several schools, and one of them was in a richer neighborhood, and it was a great school. They were both good schools, but they had way more supplies. The building was up to date. They had iPad carts, right? And I went to another school where the heat was shut off half the time.
Yeah.
There's asbestos everywhere, and the kids can't take their books home. That's the cycle of poverty right there and there. Now, and this is going to be the obvious statement, but does anybody want to take a wild guess what the racial makeups were of these schools? And again, I used to teach an essay about this, and there's this weird thing in American history where we think the North was just the fucking shit. They were awesome and everything else, but then you look into how they moved people. They put groups in the poor areas because they knew for a fact that that's gonna fuck them over because that's how the cycle of poverty works. You get a worse education. Statistically, we're already bound to end up probably a little above or below where our parents are. That's the huge myth in this country, especially. It's work hard enough and you can succeed. Ignores luck, ignores networking, ignores all that stuff. But then you throw in all that other stuff, and it's holy crap. But then when I'm in this classroom, I'm in a classroom with 14-year-old kids. Half of whom are just okay, they're not idiots. They know the society's given up on them, and so then we get all shocked when people get violent or when they do what they need to do to survive, and it's wow, what the hell?
That's the myth. The myth is kind of that reactionary behavior is completely inappropriate. However, you put a mouse in a cage and cheese on the other side, it's going to try to get to it as hard as it can in any way, shape, or form.
Well, and I was always when we're talking about issues trying to help crime, you can't go after people who have. You can't go after people who are so. If I was in a situation where I knew society gave up on me and I had to make money, come on, let's just be frank about how. If
I'm turning tricks.
Yeah, whatever's happening, I'm going to consider some options. But I'm not a violent person, so I probably have to turn tricks as well. I need a pimp though.
We'll talk later.
Okay, all right, cool. But yeah, it gets to the point where it gets almost ridiculous and sad. 'Cause it's we're just holding each other back, and again, they're kids. There's nothing more disheartening than seeing a kid who can't even drive yet already know that they're fucked. That's heartbreaking. And it's wow.
I mean, but think about all the classic stories throughout the world. Please, Sarah, I want some more.
Yeah.
Or the Prince and the Pauper or I don't know, Jesus washing feet and shit like that. From the beginning of time, the story of the poor has always been with us.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that even from the point where we were all running around with unowned property, eating fruits off the trees, until now, we just keep getting worse? We haven't figured anything out?
It's weird.
We just keep going.
Well, it's victim blaming, really. Because now I will say that there are some people who have, But look, let's be as frank as, because this is that weird exception to rule. Because you'll say that, and then somebody will point out somebody that like succeeded, did the rags to riches.
One person.
But yeah, but when you do the comparisons, like the amount of stuff they had to do versus just being born
reverse
rich.
straw man.
Yeah. How is it a reverse straw man?
Because instead of you're taking a reality and you're misrepresenting it with one person, with one example, right?
Yeah.
So instead of saying, okay, yes, I acknowledge that this is difficult across the board, you say, no, it's not difficult across the board because of my anecdote.
Because X. And what happens is when you pick those anecdotes apart and you compare it to somebody who was just born wealthy, it's like, what did you do to succeed? I was born. What did this person do to succeed? Well, they were born, but then they had to escape this situation. Then this happened. Then this happened. Then this happened. Then they got lucky here, but then this happened. This like you could do this with people, and you go, wait a minute. Like that's why I'm a big proponent of doing as much as possible to alleviate the lotto of birth, because it's just it's just random. And like certainly I'm also big on personal responsibility, because that's important too. But I'm big on society, like giving people the best chance, because that's what's the best thing for society and then the individuals ultimately. Because when fire starts down the street and you just ignore it, eventually that fire takes your house too. Like it's, even if we want to do it selfishly and like, hey, if we all help each other, people will be less likely to mess with me. Do it the selfish way. It's fine. Just do it then. And like it gets annoying because you can't. I don't subscribe to any kind of concept of like you're just naturally guilty in the world. I subscribe to the concept that if you are aware of problems and can do something and do nothing, then you become guilty. Like and you don't have to do everything. Just try. And try.
I wouldn't even say that was like a human condition. That's a cultural condition, and we try to pretend that it's a human condition.
Yeah.
But when you look throughout history at the behavior of like different tribes, right?
Yeah.
Just think about all the tribes that were just flatly equal and social, or any of the major matriarchal societies throughout time who didn't have any of the issues that we have now. We've built this into our construct.
Yeah,
you know,
it is a construct. It's absolutely a construct. I think because again, like you go back and you look and you can see examples on both sides, and the thing that the good ones usually have in common, whatever the structure is that common notion of a balance between the collectivity of the group and the importance of the individual. Like that's the whole key for any functioning society, is you got to strike that balance. And once you can, like there's countries in the world right now that do pretty damn good at this. And I think you're right that a lot of this is an America thing because of American history, and one of the worst things we do is we don't teach it.
But we do teach that ideology, which if you actually boil it down, it's like we lay out an ideology, and if you were to add it up mathematically, it should equal chaos on paper. And it does equal chaos in actuality.
Yes.
However, when they're teaching that ideology, they're doing the math wrong in front of you, and it's saying gold, God, and glory, Gold plus God plus glory equals success for all human beings. However,
well, my favorite piece of history I ever learned, which just blew my mind, and it made so much sense, was that it was American history, and it was that in between Columbus, the slave mongering, murdering piece of shit, getting here, and European actual colonization. What happened is, and it of course was happening all over the continent. So there was like from Spain, from Viking. So there's chips away all over the continent. They were like raiding for lumber. You could read like the actual journals. And what happened is a huge plague ended up happening. And the main theory used to be that it was smallpox, but now some epidemiologists, they think that what happened is because there was a weird inverse where the people that the Europeans and all these other colonizers called savages were really clean. Like they bathed, they were really hygienic, and the Europeans were not. So they were bringing over diseases that were getting introduced to the water systems.
Time out. So what we're saying is that pox
is a bad
really
thing.
From Europe.
Yes, agreed. But it gets really trippy when you realize what happened. So it was like 90% of the population got wiped out. So who was the people that's why there was no colonization between those two. Europeans couldn't do it because there's too many people here. Like there was a society here. You could go visit. Like they were advanced, in fact. And in fact, the dip off from them not burning as much wood.
Were they advanced, or was it aliens?
It was aliens. It's always aliens. But when this happened, there's a theory that this caused a little ice age because so many people died in this continent and stopped burning so much wood that it caused an actual climate change. And that's when the Europeans came over. So they were conquering basically the wasteland. And that's like the story of what's Squanto is insane, where he was kidnapped as a child. That's how he knew English, and he was paraded around Europe. And eventually, he got enough money to get back, but it was post-disease, so he came back to his village to find it wiped out. And then Europeans came, met him, and he got sick from them and died.
Didn't Pocahontas, one, the entire story of Pocahontas is incorrect. But two, wasn't she also taken to Europe, paraded around, and like
Possibly.
used as marketing material?
Met the queen, I think.
Yeah, it happened a lot. And again, it's a real sobering idea when you think about, like, it's funny when you read, because we have this idea when we're taught, like, at the beginning of the country, that it's really hard to get across. And no, it was tough, because it was still, like, old time, like, there wasn't, like, a hospital. But you read those accounts, and everybody's like, yeah, then we just followed the road, we just had to clear it off, because there's a ton of roads everywhere, because there's been people here for thousands and thousands of years. You know, and it's weird when you get that, like, just total, like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of factual sense.
I think that might apply a little bit more to Central and South America.
No, it's North America too. Like the Monk's Mound in St. Louis was bigger than the Pyramid of Giza. Like it was like a transport. Like it was all across the continent. That it was. There's people here for thousands of years, and of course we don't teach that. Yeah, you know, it's bad enough that we stole it. They're gonna and yeah, they were all really sick and dying too, and we should like. How horrible does that? The look is horrible. I'm not gonna lie, but it's what fucking happened.
Yeah.
And it's like it makes a lot of sense when you're like, okay. Because every time this move has ever been done with a full country, it always fails eventually. Because there's too many people. They're like, you're coming to their home. It's like, no. Eventually, they're going to push back. And the reason it succeeded here was there was just not enough resistance. Too many people had died from the plague that was introduced. Bummer, huh? Sorry. But it's a bummer, but it's the truth. It's what happened. It's like, yeah, you don't put that in a history book, but maybe you should, because maybe kids would stop being so fucking cruel to each other, or maybe we could stop if we realize how much tragedy has happened already. It's like, no
That
more.
is true. I mean, there is kind of this missing reality, or this missing understanding of where we came from that I think skews our idea of entitlement.
Yep.
And I think skews our idea of goodness, you know, or justice.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the aphorisms that I think is genuinely true is that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And that's literally like a sociological theory, too. It's called conflict theory. But, like, doesn't it feel like that sometimes? Like, we just keep letting the problem fester. And then it keeps breaking out. It's just like any kind of disease. It's just like now it's a social disease. And the cure for it is honesty and empathy and, you know, restructuring a little bit.
Do you find yourself trying to write about any of these items? Any of them?
Indeed. Sometimes.
Probably. I mean, I can't think of an example specifically, but
Pockets.
yeah. I mean, pockets.
Well,
yeah, but
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, I
a
was
pretty,
trying to think of
pretty glaring example.
other ones, but yeah.
I'd like to throw out a question, if I may. On this topic, in terms of education, history, and culture and all that, do you think there seems to be for how much controversy about history exists now, schools still teach a lot about, especially the problems, the bad things that happen.
They're definitely getting better.
They also teach about Paul Revere. Who wasn't Paul Revere. So they're teaching propaganda also.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, but you didn't even get your question out.
I'm still trying to formulate my question, but I work in education, so I write a lot of the books, and like a lot of it is a focus on different groups and different tragedies through history. Now, do you think it's better to tell kids about different groups and all the bad isms and all the tragedies and all the horrible things? Just imagine a scenario where you didn't talk about that and you just talked about, what if you didn't teach history? Do you think kids would grow up and not know about all these divisions and all these bad things?
We'd find things out online, but I think it'd be very hard for us to assess truth of that.
Yeah, and I think that's the big issue with truth in general. All the info's out there, but people aren't taught how to cipher it out, how to find actual research, how to do that.
I just mean, if you never taught children that hate has been such a big part,
Would they learn
would they learn to hate by themselves? in like a multicultural society like it is now.
I'll give you this. Tay the AI that was made by, I want to say Google, and was introduced to Twitter and became racist within 24 freaking hours because people got a hold of it. Yeah, like I used to teach a series of lessons about Red Riding Hood, and I just went all the way back. I think I mentioned this before, but like you go back to the original and they're dark. People get raped, and everything's horrible, and gradually it lightens as the burden of society lightens. But the problem is the burden just shifted in a different direction. It went less from you got to find your food and you may hunt, to the ideological constructs we carry through all that to justify a lot of that. And that, if you don't teach that to somebody, like same with the logical fallacies, if you're not told these are what they are, then you could falter. And I think and I know it sucks to think about teaching a 5-year-old about genocide, but this is the world. Like, we're in a lot of trouble because we don't talk about this, I think. Maybe like 8, 9, I'd be okay with like getting, but the problem with learning is when kids hit a certain age, a lot of that personality is locked in, and it's hard to change. So if you give them a base of like, because the world is not it is magical, actually. Like, existence is beautiful, but it's pretty shitty in terms of our constructs.
From like even as a teenage male or early 20s male, I didn't start learning about some of the legitimate horrors that actually happen to women my age until I was older, So I was naive and uneducated until I was older. But when I actually started to understand that, I think it even helped me grow exponentially in my expectations and in my behavior. So I think no matter what age it happens, and unfortunately it's very maybe burdensome as a child to realize that people suffer and have been hurt, but at the same time it prevents you from thinking that all humor, all behavior is innocuous and without consequence.
I think if you posit suffering truthfully to a child, I know the sad part is that a lot of the blinders are going to fall off. Like, the sad stuff ain't going to fly. But I also think that's not helpful, because now you're going to have, like us, I'm the same way. Like, a lot of this I learned late in life, like through research, through all this other stuff, where I had to dig it out of there and know how to find it. And it's like, it sucks, but I do think it's the truth hurts, but the truth is I always rather the truth, because I can't go off of anything else.
Me too. I mean, when I think back on my education and I hear about how other people went through school and things that they learned, I'm thankful. My teachers told me about things that went wrong and things that people did that were wrong, and that gave me a basis for creating my own opinions and my own beliefs about things, and I think that it's made me a better person.
Yeah, I think
I think I'm always an advocate for more education, right?
Yeah,
more
too.
truth.
Because I think then your baseline starts to become less constructs, less I don't carry any ideology. I don't need them. I just carry facts of history, theories, and how the notion, like, try to make the world better as much as you can. Because I think I think most people, unless they have something really terrible going on, if you give them, be an agent of change and positivity in the world, because look how much suffering has happened, look how much time has been wasted, I think the majority of people would take that to heart and would at least grow as a person. And I think if in that kind of world, aren't we also identifying that if you teach kids young about tragedy, and some of those kids aren't having the right reaction, you could start catching some mental health stuff pretty quick. Because, we want to stop these people who come in and do this. Well, why them? We gotta keep them young. Because there becomes points of no return for some people, and it's over.
I think there are always probably going to be some people that will want to share, and there will always be some people that will hoard or take for themselves. And I think maybe that's even written at the core,
Balance and act kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there are some people that are gonna
I feel really bad for the girl.
kind of resonate with the animal in themselves, and some people are gonna resonate with the human component of themselves.
It's like the idea that there's two wolves inside you.
Right.
Which one do you feed?
Perfect.
Yeah. Virginia Woolf and Beowulf. You are an English syllabus. I do
love
think,
that
though,
one.
one thing I will say is that the balance is extremely skewed. So I'd be curious to see if the balance is more even. If the people who would instinctually want to hoard, if there was more of a check, not a check, but like just more of a, like, that's far less socially acceptable behavior. how much of that is because they weren't taught stuff? Like how much? Because I'm really curious in the concept of if there is a tabula rasa, or at least there's an energy driving it that has a purpose. How much easier is it to make things better if there's less put on, or if you know how to fight it early on and deal with it? Because again, like I said before, one of the problems here is that people have a lot of ignorance or feigned ignorance, and the problems just seem like we're at the point where our planet's going, knock knock, like it has a silenced pistol behind its back. Like we're in a lot of trouble, and I think it's sad because I really don't believe that. I know there's always going to be issues. I'm not so naive to believe that that's all. But whoa, can it be like? It's like 90-10 the wrong way, and I think it's because so much of stuff we have to deal with now is ideas versus the physical, practical. We're at war here, we're at war there. Now it's this stuff, this all in the head stuff, most of which is bullshit that we have to just kind of sort through. And the only way we're gonna be able to do that is together. But that's really it.
It's like the first generation when we are just, well, not the first, second, third generation, that we're not getting up and struggling to survive.
Exactly.
We can sit down and think about things. We don't have to like march off to war.
Right.
So I mean, it's so many blessings, but now we have a whole new, a new wheelbarrow full of problems to deal with in our own brains.
I think climate change, if we can deal with that one, because that one's definitely number one.
Yeah.
I do have hope, honestly. I think the change is coming, but like then you see stuff like, how many times do you see some young black guy get shot on TV by a cop and just go, like patriarchy issues, all the isms, and it starts to get this weird, like I've noticed like there's this weird feedback loop where then you get that incel stuff happen to a lot of like white guys. It's like, okay, that's creepy. I'm not going to defend it, but I can see like there's just this festering of hatred. Like we don't want to live in a society where we don't trust cops, but I don't trust cops. And I'm not, like, they're not going to pull me over. They probably should. I probably have drugs on me. Like, it's... Sorry, and I probably should edit that one. But no, that's a true actual statistic that like, I used to teach of, like... And it's just like, come on, everybody. Most of this is... I'd say 99% of the stuff we still fight over is actually bullshit. I'd go that high, and I'd maybe go 100%. I just want to leave a little wiggle room for people being jerks, because that does happen, but most of it is just stuff we made up.
How's the bullshit transferred from generation to generation?
I appeal to tradition, does it a lot. You know,
My daddy said.
Well, and I think
We've
sometimes...
always done it this way.
Yeah, I think Bill Burr did a good analogy where he was saying, like, how his grandfather was really bad and his dad was a little better but still kind of bad, and like you can break that cycle. You just have to be able to identify it. And I think that's the scary thing. Is a lot of people get stuck in the hate echo chamber, and if you don't have any experience to challenge that, and then you seek out, because you get confirmation bias. It's all people have that, where you'll only seek out the stuff that says, you know, I'm right. Bill Burr calls it IamRight.com. And I think the only way to break it is to make society where people can experience more, where they have the critical thinking skills, where they know the truth. Like, I can't tell you how many kids I had to counter some stuff where I'm like, whoa, that's not right.
Now, I expected the internet to do more by way of exposing everybody to each other.
Yeah.
But that's it. They go into their confirmation bias. They seek out their echo chambers. So instead of actually seeing the world at large, they seek out their little corner where they can just reverberate amongst themselves.
And that's us misusing the tech, right? And I think what's also in defense of that behavior, the only thing it says is the internet's freaking crazy.
Yeah.
So if you don't know how to use it or where to go, like to get the info, or like even know what the truth is, then I could see you kind of retreat back. But those echo chambers are bad news, man. They really are. Like they're, as soon as like you see some of that stuff, it's like,
Yeah.
that's they're I don't know if echo chamber like they're different layers of hell.
It's like, you don't even want to call it rhetoric at that point. You just need a darker, more
Zealotry.
sinister word.
It's
Yes.
zealotry.
It's just terror.
Yeah, and it's happening all over the political spectrum with almost every idea. And it's like, oh, everybody, most of this is going to involve some calm moderation and working together and compromise versus like it's like that animal part just wants to always come out. It's like, yeah, we got to face this tribalism shit out of the code because it's not. We didn't do it right. We did it based on snap judgments versus character. And here we are.
I'm sorry. I was just fantasizing for a second about judging people on character instead of superficial things.
Oh, does it feel
That's
nice?
a crazy idea. Don't do that.
You know what? I'm pretty sure in that world there's no more war either. Imagine, dude.
Well, there
Hey,
might be war against, you know. the
we can't.
lower-
No. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to switch down.
But it would be such a beautiful switch.
Honestly, have a moment and just genuinely think about what it would be like to walk out to a world where there's no war. Where you know that never again there's just going to be, like, especially if you're in a war-torn country. Like, why are we not aiming for that? Like, it's weird. It's like, that's the best. I would do a cartwheel. I'm like, I'm not going to get shot today. There's no tanks. It's all good. Like, I know
There's less war than there used to be.
there is, thankfully. But it's getting a little...
Because other places are working towards that. I don't think it's us.
Well, when somebody's working on tactical nukes, I start getting a little, why?
Now, what I would do, once again, dictator, monarch, supreme overlord.
Supreme being. I love that it just keeps. It's gonna, by the end of this episode, it's like, so when I'm God.
Nurturing mother father. That's what we'll just call
I
it.
like that.
I like
I like the mother father.
And you know what? That's a little bit of the didactic side, not the fallacy side coming through, right? So when I am up there, probably going to leave the bottom 5% intellectually, you know. Then I'm going to get rid of the next 5 to 20%.
I'm less sad that I said I do illegal things. Let's plan out his God
Oh,
genocide.
no, it's alright. Illegal things are perfectly fine. They curb ambition, so we're going to leave that. We're going to encourage that. There's going to be a lot more illegal things. We're going to plant them in people's houses and just wait.
Just wait.
We. I thought it was just
We?
Is this the royal we?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he is both. He's all things
Mother,
together.
father.
He's mother, father, child,
I
priest god thing. He is the manifestation
Priest
of.
God thing.
Priest
I
God
think
thing.
that's
Wow,
good
that's
too.
going to be on the dating profile.
Can you do me one thing? So when,
Bang with an A in there.
Yeah.
when you're sending down your like drug angels, can you please make like a LSD spray where they're just walking around, just going. Psh. You're about to have a weird day. I'm here if you need me. Here's myself. Can you call a friend?
Hey, what time is it? Tomorrow.
Oh god, we needed that little catharsis. This one was getting really bleak. We didn't even talk about cannibalism yet.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I had
eventually.
motif alert.
Yeah.
Oh,
So who's working on something right now?
I've been busy. I kind of took. Oh, are we sharing or are we just?
Yeah.
Oh, you guys share first. I don't know.
No, go on. Please.
Jack, can I have my paper back?
Yes.
TM was hoarding it.
Oh, I just want to read it.
We're gonna just do
Yeah,
a little
please.
read. This is the piece I got published recently, so and it's very short, so I thought maybe it would be appropriate. And I have a lot of things I'm working on, but they're mostly longer, and I wouldn't really have time to.
So this is Mark and his recently published piece.
Yes. It's called The Bad Egg. Scott took an egg out of the refrigerator, palmed it like a magician, and slipped its cold ovalness into his jacket pocket as he walked out the back door. He went outside into the cooling evening with the smuggled egg in his pocket and a dizzy giddiness in his stomach, his head full of plans. He got on his bike and rode through the yard, down the driveway, and onto the sidewalk. He stopped several times because the egg was bouncing against the side of his butt cheek with the spinning of his legs. It was annoying, and he worried the egg would break. Flustered, he at last decided to tuck the egg into the hanging hood of his jacket. The new spot held the egg like a soft backpack. He pedaled off again, feeling like a weird backwards bird. Now he felt like a bomber. He zoomed this way and that, pretending to dodge flak. He made flak sounds by vibrating spit on his tongue. He pictured the bombing run, the heat of the moment, all the decisions and actions meeting at one crucial half moment, the explosion. But when he saw the corner of Jenkins Street, reality was slapping him in the face, and he was just a 10-year-old with an egg. The target, Mike Ingalls' house, was looking right at him. The house looked arrogant and ugly, a bully of a building, just like the kid who lived there. Scott zoomed right by, afraid to even turn his head to look at it. He barely risked turning his eyes for fear of drawing attention. A hot rush of fear gripped him. It was not only the fear of being caught by Mike Ingalls, it was also the fear of not knowing how to digest what was happening. He was supposed to whip the egg like a fastball, and it was supposed to splatter smack into a yellow mushroom cloud all over Mike Ingalls' house. It was supposed to be a victory for the underdog, a punch at a tyrant. What was it now? Mission aborted? That was crazy. That was stupid. Scott was a bomber again, with a scowl now. Flak had been too heavy on the first pass, but he was going back, chills on his spine and ice on his gaze. He pedaled up, side-eyeing the house growing as he approached it, meeting the glare of its staring windows. He reached back over his shoulder, dipping his fingers into his hood and, skidded, almost wiped out. A light had appeared in the living room window, a hint of a voice. Panting, Scott drove the pedals madly until he was back home, the payload hanging heavy. Scott slowed and stopped at the end of his driveway. He tried to decide how he would approach this. He couldn't end the evening as a coward. Was he a coward? Did Mike Ingalls win again? Scott thought about it, then shook the results from his mind and thought about it again. Finally, brown knit, he thought. No, Mike Ingalls didn't win. He's still a prick. I won, because I chose not to do something bad. He tested a smile, then forced it out and held it. I'm a good egg, he whispered, and laughed. As Scott walked the bike around his house, he found Uncle Chuck on the back porch, smoking. Hey, sport, he said, taking a ride? Yeah, said Scott, it helps me think. Really, what you thinking? I'm thinking that doing the right thing is its own reward, said Scott. Uncle Chuck widened his eyes and made a huh sound. It was an odd sound, almost as if he was surprised by the idea, or he found it a little funny. Ah, to be a kid again, he chortled, and happily slapped Scott on the back.
I love that, man. That was a good story.
I like how in the beginning you use a characteristic and you swap it out for the identity. So he tucked the ovalness in the pocket.
It's synecdoche or metonymy. It's one of those two.
I don't know either of those words.
I've heard them, I don't know what they mean.
One of them is the substitution of the thing for the whole. I believe it's synecdoche.
Okay.
So that's a good literary technique that I love very much.
Yeah. I think that's one that I'd like to incorporate more. Just like I was talking about before about building the aesthetic.
Yeah.
So one more time, what's that word again?
Synecdoche and metonymy. Let me make sure I know
It was
which.
a city in New York.
It is actually.
Schenectady?
Yeah, it's a city in New York, but it's actually also a. Let me see if I remember that.
You know what? I really like the splatter smack mushroom cloud.
Oh, thank you.
I like the bully
What a
of a
good image.
building.
Yeah.
Like you can picture it. You can picture that.
Mercy, how far along is Pockets?
The final draft has been submitted to Diva Theater for consideration.
Okay. So,
So
are we going
we're in a holding pattern right now.
I see.
When I know more, I'll share.
Yep, it's synecdoche, a figure of speech in which a part is made to represent the whole or vice versa. Sports teams, it happens all the time. You know, Cleveland won by X. You know, so,
Or like he and his hoods were out there.
yeah,
like,
yeah. So, yeah, bully of a building, I think, is my favorite one.
See, that's kind of like what we were talking about, description.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to say the egg was how many millimeters, and it was very white, and it was this and that. It's just like,
Yeah,
We know what an egg
yeah,
looks like.
it's perfect because you describe it because the emotion, the character's feeling, and that's how you do imagery right there. Is you know, stop it with the humble. You could stop it with the humble. You could take one. That was a cool. You did a really good job.
okay.
Well, and the switch to the military
Yeah, he was making the flak
side,
noises.
and the payload was heavy, and it's
And
good.
when he actually
Good
started to
stuff.
second guess himself, he switched back over to just a kid. But then
And that's when we got the story proper, which was great.
The delusion of grandeur and back to reality.
Yeah.
A lot of autobiography.
But you're a good egg
I'll
then.
make sure to keep my eggs away from you.
Yeah, also, yes.
My ovals.
Yes. Just the oval one.
Just the oval one.
Just the oval one.
He's a square one.
Yeah, the square ones are.
Triangle ones, though. Watch out.
So, who's ready for writing prompts?
Me. This makes me feel like a little kid again, in like the best possible way. Although, I really want to make sure I please the God King Mother.
Well, yes. Otherwise, those
Cthulhu.
eggs, those
Essentially
eggs
Cthulhu.
If you have pictures, you have to show them to everybody.
Yeah.
are- So, this time I'm actually going to pay attention to when those 5 minutes start.
Oh.
Yeah, look at that.
Oh, hold on, I'll put my hat on. In my
So-
hood. I'm getting serious.
The first prompt is
Oh, nobody else is gonna read this?
Does anyone else have anything?
Oh, I didn't mean to.
I mean, I brought stuff, but we can write.
no,
Yeah, I don't know. We'll write
Let's
and
write
read.
now.
Right?
Write
We'll
now.
read next time. We'll read next time.
We'll write now.
I didn't mean to steal the show.
How long is it?
Steal it, man.
just do
We are a multi-episodic
Writing.
podcast.
Writing.
We're gonna
Writing.
have more, man.
Okay.
We're main cast. It's okay.
So, same story, 5-minute prompt.
Oh, I thought that was
They're going to take 5 minutes to write whatever comes to mind. They can shuffle the words around, recharacterize the idea, just make it theirs and go with it. We would invite you to do the same and to comment your creation.
I think Daryl should also do this.
No, he's got. Yeah, I would like it.
Hey, I'm the one who has to write the prompt.
Well, then you should be an expert.
You should comment yours, Daryl.
Maybe we should
Alright,
take
you know what?
turns with the prompts.
Okay, we can try that.
Maybe in the future we'll have special guest prompts.
So the
Yeah.
first prompt is:
Okay.
the crone and the miser were at the nexus of those ash-born lands.
Jeez, you got to do that one again.
The crone and the miser were at the nexus of those ash-born lands.
Of those,
Ashbourne lands.
and did you say crone with an N? Oh, okay.
And the second one is of apes and angels.
Oh, it's gonna be another weird one.
Yep.
So as we get started, just a little blurb. We're here at the Game Chateau. The Game Chateau is the first coffee and tabletop lounge in Wilkes-Barre at Plaza 315. Visit it for all of your caffeine, board game, and RPG needs. If you're in Wilkes-Barre, be sure to stop in and keep it playful.
Game Chateau, it's a shit.
It's a fun place.
Alright, I'm going to give you guys an extra minute for that.
Okay.
Thank you, God King.
I saw the picture as it was. Oh yeah, like I saw it. Yeah. Oh, whoa. Okay. Hi. The other one that got me was the swinging with like vampire thing above the bed. Yep. Like it's like I knew that something was up there. I figured that it was gonna like drop down onto the bed, so that's where like, and all of a sudden it was like up here. Up here. The big coffin in the final room that opened up. That was impressive. I wasn't there a few nights. Yeah. I had to leave off of it, but the one night you get a big malfunction at the end where all like the lights, the warehouse lights turned on, and all the power turned off, and the coffin, because it's air pressurized, instead of opening, just stayed. And I was locked in there for like 10 minutes. Terrifying. Worst experience.
Ready to get back into this?
Yeah.
Where we left off, Clatter was dragged to the water's edge by this
Slide it up so that you can read the
woman with red hair. I know she has red hair on the big redhead.
chocolate with pepper.
She weirdly simple
to like a fucking test exam.
Still have 2 minutes, so you're doing okay.
Write something for me.
I already finished a self-contained small little story, so I'm not writing anything else. I'm gonna get another water.
By 2 minutes, I really meant like 1 minute.
Who are you? And when they eat, they get home equal to your body size. And you would lose one population. You don't want to kill them out. But you only have what do you want? That was my corn over to take it. Well, they're doing well because of the excess food that we eat.
How'd you do, Marcy?
I mean, I have something.
I have words.
I'm gonna go with that.
Something counts. Words count.
Most of them are spelled correctly.
That I wouldn't be able to promise anyone.
Yes, I think most of mine are spelled correctly.
I think I'm very dependent on spell check. That's it. Time's up. Alright. You guys remember the Not It game, right?
Not it.
Oh, mark it first.
I don't want to be first.
He said it though. I think we were playing two. I don't think we established how we played
That's
Not
the-
It.
that's
I
the
mean,
only
you
Not
didn't.
It
You
game that I
didn't.
know.
You didn't even do anything.
It's alright.
Well, that's because I didn't do anything.
You're letting us down. It's God.
You're a pretty lazy god.
I
Mother
am
father.
trying to
Hey,
maintain
don't
an
diss
air
the
of
mother father.
mystery, you know?
Snap your fingers and have something up here. I didn't do well. I just had an idea. I don't know.
Ideas are fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I
Everything starts with ideas.
Yeah. Not everything. I went right to the post-apocalypse. I apologize.
Me too.
Okay, Ashborn, I took that to mean like once everything's been reduced to ashes and people are starting to try to regrow something out of that. The world has been flattened and burned. The crone and the miser are very poor people with nothing between them, but they're still like kings compared to the other people who have, like, they're living in caves again. They're the apes, and the crone and the miser have to try to organize the people and find some system to regrow this ruined earth. Super.
I pretty much wrote that story.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
not gonna lie.
All right.
I think it was pretty leading.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you should share next.
Okay. It's
I mean,
called.
if Mark's done. Are you
Oh,
done?
I'm
I'm
done.
sorry.
I'm
Oh,
It's called but I took it the same exact way. That was a wasteland.
That's frightening.
I took the crone and the miser as Jungian archetypes.
Okay.
And I was gonna make them real because sometimes I wish I was as good as Neil Gaiman, but one can try. So it's called Apocalypse. The crone and the miser were at the nexus of Ashbourne lands. It was scorched ruin. Satiated, the shadow approached them. Of apes and men, it said, gesturing to the wasteland. So pleasing, so much nothing. The miser fell and started to lick the ashes. The crone was more deliberate, pulling jars from a dead-skinned bag and filling them with bones. She said nothing. The shadow surveyed its work. Ah well, back to the drawing board.
I don't want to go now.
That's spooky. What did the crone do with the bones?
I don't know. It's probably something. Probably making
It's
like
not-
I took them as like Neil Gaiman-esque characters. So like actual. I'm actually trying to work on something like this, where like the Jungian archetypes are real and like doing stuff. Because it's I really like Sandman for that same reason. They like personified death and all that other stuff. So yeah, I don't know what they would do with it, but I imagine I'd have to flesh it out a little bit.
It sounds like they had something in mind.
yeah, kind of.
It sounds
That's
pretty
what I was saying.
authoritative.
Yeah, like the I just thought the miser would just eat and fill itself, and I felt like the crone was taking supplies of like the you'd have to imagine if you were the archetype, because I kind of took the witch archetype too with that, but if you were like, you'd be doing like super crazy spells, so you would need like the bones of the dead after the apocalypse or something like that to like make a black hole or whatever.
Tears of children.
Lots of tears of children, I imagine.
Swimming pool.
And then I don't know. I thought.
It toppled her over. There was more time lost again.
I like that ending.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah, that one was spooky too.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way we could have gone not gone
Not
spooky.
gone spooky.
We
Okay.
should have done
Ashbourne
something
Lands.
cheerful.
No,
We
you
should have
never
done
want to
something.
do that. So the one time
Throwing the ash around.
my one writing prompt for my one writing group, we did like flowers because we realized everything was so dark that we were all writing, and we came back and it was the darkest stuff we ever. One of the stories was about World War II soldiers seeing